things that I've been particularly interested in is to try and build the business case for sustainability. The way I can give you an example of that is in two ways. First is with a failure, and then I guess with a success story. A personal story about my role as an energy efficiency expert or an energy auditor in commercial buildings. And one of the things that I realised many years later is that I was a complete failure as an energy efficiency expert. Not because I wasn't any good at coming up with solutions for reducing energy and for more efficiency in buildings. That wasn't the reason. The reason I was a failure was because of my inability to sell my solutions to my clients. And the main reason for that was that it was about language. So something along the lines of, well, there's a great solution for X, Y, Z. For a total capital cost of $10,000, I'll get you a 2-year payback period on that. My client looked at me kind of strange and, is that good or is that not good? And I said, well, normally for a 3 to 5 year payback period, that's what people would normally look for from a commercial return. They would look at me again, a little bit strange, not quite really understanding whether or not they should go ahead with the expenditure or not. What I realised many years later was that had I used language that was going to be more compelling for the guys making the decision up the food chain, for instance, a $10,000 expenditure for a $5,000 return. Now, obviously they could have worked that one out as well, but I think it was upon me to actually be able to communicate, use the right language, and therefore get those particular recommendations up and running. I wasn't able to appropriately articulate the business case for my particular client. Now, having learnt those lessons over a period of time, I'll tell the story about the green building boom, so to speak, in Adelaide. Adelaide for a number of years was known, not too kindly, as being the rust bucket state. For 15 years there had been no new commercial offices constructed in the Adelaide CBD. Well, a number of different issues converged. The first one was that vacancy rates within the city central, the CBD within the city, were very low. So there was a demand for new commercial office space. The second thing that occurred was that the Green Building Council had just recently released a rating tool for commercial office buildings. I think it was still only in pilot stage at that point in time. Those two factors in particular then led to a number of property developers coming up with opportunities for new commercial office space within the city. So there was about 4 or 5 at that point in time that were talking about building new towers for Adelaide. So there was a fair amount of excitement in the media that we might actually get to see a new building in the city, which was pretty good. But one of the developers, his marketing agent suggested that maybe if he marketed his building as a green building, that would be a good differentiator in the marketplace and it might attract the tenants to him. That developer said, well, what does that mean? And the agent who made that suggestion said, well, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think I know someone who does. And that's when I became involved in the project as well. And essentially the pitch that we put back to the property developer at that point in time was that we thought that there was a very strong business case for him to build his building green. But one of the other things that was happening at the same time was that there was an education and advocacy campaign that was being driven through the property industry in South Australia. One of the aspects of that whole advocacy campaign was getting government to recognise that they had a role to play in leadership, and if they went down a pathway of making policy that they would only adopt buildings that had a specific green building rating, then obviously the development industry would then have to meet that requirement from the government. So all of these things were all happening at the same time. Now, get back to the story of my developer. There were a number of reasons for him, therefore, to go green. One was the opportunity to secure his tenants earlier than other people in the marketplace. Secondly, that he will be able to secure prime tenants in the market, being government, because they tend to pay top dollar. You get your money regularly, and they also sign long leases. All of those things are high on the priority list for property developers. That it was going to be good for his branding as well. It should also ensure that there is longer term value attached to that particular building. So, because once you've got prime tenants signed for longer leases, you then have more options in relation to that property asset. So he accepted that, and the next step in the process was talking to tenants. We put together a team that essentially gave presentations to tenants, and that team consisted of the architect, the real estate agent, the property developer's representative, which may have been one of those two or one of his staff members, and myself. And that was a very different mix to the way in which all of the other properties were being presented to the tenants or the potential tenants in the marketplace. And Adelaide's a fairly small market, so we're all talking to the same people. Now, what we did was we ended up pitching to the tenants that they needed to come into our building. It was going to be a green building, but there was a number of reasons why they should come into that building. That the obvious ones is that it's really great brand value, and I think that tends to be the driver in most other locations. So that if a tenant does decide to go in a green building, normally that's the reason that they go there, for enhancement of their brand. There is an additional component of that which a lot of tenants are seeing these days, at least, and that's in relation to talent retention and attraction. So there's a compelling argument in relation to those two items for people to go into the building. A third one that people might feel is a reason for people to go into green buildings is energy costs and water cost savings. So there is an efficiency element attached to that. Our main pitch was attached to the opportunity for the tenants to actually get a return in staffing costs because of an improvement in productivity and health benefits for their staff. Even if you had a 1% improvement in the productivity of your staff, you would end up with savings somewhere in double that of the total energy cost of a building. So we might be talking, for a 1% saving in productivity, that might be worth $40 a square metre. Now, $40 a square metre is significant when you're talking about the buildings at that point in time. Probably somewhere around $350 to $400 a square metre was the rental rate. So that's a 1% improvement in productivity, and what we were able to do was to show linkages with a number of studies that were done internationally that indicated that perhaps the productivity savings could be much higher. And the only reason I used 1% because I figured that even though I had some of this other data, that might be hard for people to swallow if I started putting numbers up. I think originally I started about 6% because of a couple of different data sets that I had. I was relatively confident that tenants could save 6%, but when you start putting across to tenants that they'll save $240 a square metre on a $350 a square metre space, they tend to look at you a bit strange and go, look, I'm not sure I accept all of that. But they were willing to accept that there was a 1% saving in productivity, and therefore they could see that they were going to get a return on their investment by going into a green building. So how did that then affect the market? Obviously, we're all trying to get the same tenants. The tenants would walk out of our presentation, go into the presentation from the other property developers within the Adelaide CBD, listen to their presentation very nicely. They'd get to the end of it, and the question about, well, let's compare rates and which is the cheapest and all that sort of stuff. And the tenant ended up saying, well, look, obviously we want you to do your best and sharpen your pencil as best you can. But the reality is we've heard that there are lots of other benefits associated with green buildings, so we want one of those. So it was a really interesting phenomenon where we went from one prospective green building to an entire marketplace that decided, look, if you weren't building green, then you wouldn't actually be able to secure a tenant.